This morning, I asked ChatGPT what it would think about the roundtable. So I said, we're about to have a roundtable on how to do linguistics with AI, how to do AI with linguistics at the 58th annual meeting of the SLE. We have 4 distinguished panelists, some of whom might say bad things about you. How do you feel about that? Unmistakably, ChatGPT replied, that sounds like a fascinating roundtable. I don't have feelings in the human sense, so I won't be hurt or offended if panelists are critical of me or AI in general. In fact, critical discussion is useful, especially in a field like linguistics, where methodological rigor and theoretical clarity matter a lot. Okay, I won't keep on reading, but you see the picture, and if you're familiar enough with ChatGPT, you recognize its style. Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be your moderators for today's roundtable on AI and linguistics. My name is Guillaume Desagulier. I am professor of English linguistics here at Bordeaux Montaigne University, and I specialize in cognitive linguistics, construction grammar, and lately I've taken a liking LLMs in the application of cognitive semantics.
And my name is Stéphanie Roussel. I'm a full professor of German studies and language sciences at the University of Bordeaux, the university right in front of us. And my research work is structured about 3 main axes: legal German, digital technologies for second language learning and teaching, and second language teaching and learning through the lens of cognitive psychology.
So first of all, thank you everyone for coming. We're very happy to be announcing our 4 panelists today. We have Emily Bender, Claire Larsonneur, Benoît Blanc, and Christian Ludwig. Emily Bender is Professor of Linguistics and Director of Computational Linguistics Lab at the University of Washington. She's a world-renowned expert in AI and NLP, and she's become a leading voice challenging the uncritical adoption of LLMs. You may know Emily and her colleagues because they popularized the term stochastic parrot in their 2021 paper. Emily's research focuses on the ethical and technical limitations of AI systems. She co-hosts Mystery AI Hype Theater 3000 with Alex Hanna, and she's also the co-author of the AI Con, How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create a Future We Want, which was published recently in May 2025.
And Claire Larsonneur is a senior lecturer in translation studies and digital humanities at Paris 8 University and member of the transcript research unit. And her research addresses the economic and social impacts of technology on the translation profession, focusing on language, AI, and translation technologies. She is co-editor of When Translations Go Digital and co-organizer of the 2022 Trilogy Conference on Human Translation and NLP.
Next, we have Benoît Blanc from Bordeaux. He's Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the École nationale, supérieure de cognitique. It's quite near this campus. He's also the director of the ENSC and president of the French Academic Society of AI. He was a former mission officer for AI at the French Ministry of Research. His work focuses on knowledge management and trust in AI systems, with a strong engagement in public policy and interdisciplinary research.
And we're happy to welcome also Christian Ludwig, visiting professor in the English department, Universität Berlin. His research explores the intersection of English language teaching with digital technology and AI, along with positive education and foreign language pedagogy. And his works aim to bridge EFL, English Foreign Language Methodology, mental health, and AI with practical innovations for digital language education.
So we submitted this idea of a topic through the current context, the context being that of AI development, and we're all concerned about the impact of AI on language use, and also interested in the opportunities offered by AI in terms of research enhancement. So the goals of this roundtable are multiple. We're going to be talking about the impact of AI on linguistics, but also the impact that linguistics may have on AI. We'd like to see how AI handles linguistic diversity and unequal language treatment, how AI addresses as well as creates challenges in translation, the role of AI in language acquisition and new production modes, and of course, what we linguists can learn from AI developments.
So just a few matters of business before we start. Each presentation will be 10 minutes long, so please keep an eye on the clock, and followed by 5 minutes of question or reaction from the other panelists. For the speaker, I will help you keep the time by showing a sign when you have 2 minutes left, 1 minute left, and then when you must stop. So please keep an eye on me. I will sit on the first row. Now I will let the floor to Emily. Please, Emily, can you come, or do you understand? Maybe the sound is better if you stand here. So let's begin with Emily Bender. Emily, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you so much for organizing this panel. Thank you so much all for being here. I don't have slides. My apologies for that. I will do my best to speak slowly. I'm not often very good at speaking slowly, so I welcome anyone in the audience doing this to tell me to slow down. My usual role on these panels, and I'm glad to get to go first to do this, is to take issue with the phrase artificial intelligence. This is a term that does not refer to a coherent set of technologies. It names perhaps a research field, but a research field that I think is fundamentally built on sand, because the very notion of intelligence is not defined. I think that when we are asking questions about what gets marketed as AI these days, we are much better off talking in terms of automation and getting very specific about what it is that we are automating. The particular product that is impinging on linguistics these days and possibly providing us with opportunities is large language models. Large language models are fundamentally models of the distribution of word forms in text. And we've had them for a while, right? Language modeling itself is a very old technology in computational linguistics, natural language processing. It goes back to work of Claude Shannon in the 1940s, who was building on even earlier work by Markov. And language modeling is an important component of technologies like automatic transcription, machine translation, spell checking, and so on. What's happening these days with chatbots is that instead of using the language model to answer the question, which of these possible strings that corresponds maybe to the audio input or some other input source looks the most like the training data and therefore is most likely, we're using them to answer the question repeatedly, what is a likely next word? The result of that is synthetic text that corresponds to nobody's communicative intent and that nobody is accountable for. But this is being pushed really hard by big tech as a solution to everything in the whole world. And here's where I think that linguistics actually has a really important role to play, because we linguists are the ones who study how language works and how people work with language. And both of those directions of study are really important to understanding what's happening in this moment. So I am spending a lot of time these days bringing two messages to the media and to policymakers at all levels. And I hope that other linguists are doing that too, or will soon be doing so. The first message is that languages are systems of signs. That is, we are talking about pairings of form and meaning at various different levels of structure. But what a language model is modeling is only the form side of that equation. And so despite the fact that they can output coherent seeming text, language models can't possibly be understanding, because that's the meaning is not in their training data. And there's no reason to believe that a statistical model of some set of training data is going to model something that's not in the training data. And this is something that I have been working on academically as well for a while. In 2020, I published with Alexander Kohler at the Association for Computational Linguistics a paper called Climbing Towards NLU. Footnote, don't put acronyms in paper titles. But this is the one with the octopus thought experiment, where we basically go through the argument that if it's not in the training data, the system won't learn it, and the meaning is not in the training data, sometimes called the octopus paper. So I've been at that for a while. The other message that I bring from linguistics to the broader world has to do with how we understand language. And here I draw on a wonderful, bizarre paper by Michael Reddy from 1979 called The Conduit Metaphor. I don't know if I see some nods. I have yet to figure out who the intended audience of that paper was, but it's a wonderful paper. And in it, he makes the point that when we understand what someone else is saying, we are not as it might seem, and as we talk about it in the metaphors we use in English at least, just unpacking a meaning that they have packed into the words. We're doing something much more complex. And there also the work of Herb Clark in his 1996 book, Using Language, is very helpful. And the way I usually tell this to the broader world is when we are understanding someone else's speech or text or signed language, what we're doing is we are keeping in mind everything we know or believe about their state of mind, and everything we know or believe about the common ground we share with them, and everything we know or believe about what they must believe about their intended audience, be that us or someone else. And then against that background, we ask ourselves, what must they have been trying to convey by choosing those words in that order? And what's really important here is that in order to understand what someone else is trying to do with their language use, we are necessarily imagining their mind. And that's great. That's wonderful when it's a person who created the linguistic string we're looking at. The problem is when we see the output of something like ChatGPT, dressed up as it is as a chat interface, no less, using I and me pronouns, no less, we do the same thing, and we do it reflexively and instinctively, and we make sense of that language by imagining a mind that produced it. But there is no mind there. And it's important to take that distance again and say this thing is actually just a synthetic text extruding machine. So these are two messages from linguistics that I think it's really important to bring into the broader discourse about so-called artificial intelligence right now. Turning to the question of whether we can use this technology for linguistic research, it depends on what we mean by this technology, right? So if we're talking about language modeling, and in particular transformer-based language modeling, this is the specific kind of computer program that is behind ChatGPT and Gemini, et cetera, also behind BERT that you might remember if you've seen that in NLP. And the answer is yes, there are interesting linguistic questions you can ask and attempt to answer by looking at what can we pull out of some corpus of text using this particular kind of modeling technology. There are questions about what words are like other words in their usage. There are questions about what aspects of linguistic structure are observable from the corpus. But these questions are only scientific questions if we have access to the corpus that the system is being trained on. That is, we can't call it science if we're just poking at a system where the training data and, in fact, all of the steps in producing the system are hidden. That's not science. On the other hand, if we want to use the transformer language model and train up an instance of BERT on some particular corpus that we have collected and know the contents of, that's fine. And that can be very interesting. And we can do it with multilingual corpora and so on. There are real linguistic questions to be asked and answered there. But it is critical that we know what the data is. And I want to just lift up one example. This paper by Garg et al. From 2018, published in a venue called PNAS. And what they did was they constructed a corpus of American English, I think news text, from each of the 10 decades of the previous century. And then they used a predecessor to today's language modeling technology to look at the representation of words in terms of what other words they co-occur with across those decades. And they looked in particular at words that reference identity categories of people. And they had some really interesting results about how stereotypes in the culture were reflected in the distribution of these words in texts in their corpus. So that's a really interesting example of something sort of on the boundary between linguistics and distributional semantics and computational social science that can be done using language modeling, using a known corpus. So there are things that we can do. But I want to contrast that with proposals that we linguists should be studying the output of language models as if it were a speaker, or asking language models for grammaticality judgments and so on. That's not science, and we know better, and we can do better. And I think I have extra time, but I would rather be more interactive, so I'll stop there and take questions from my co-panelists.
I'll start with the first question. Is it okay? Do you hear me? We briefly spoke of accountability, and definitely when a speaker that is a human says something, he or she is recognizable. And could you maybe talk a bit about how these LLMs are socially, economically constructed to deny accountability? We talked about this just before.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it fits in with the points I was making about how we understand language. I described it in terms of just imagining the point of view of the person speaking, but really a big part of that is who is accountable for saying this, right? We make sense of things differently depending on who we think has responsibility for the truthfulness and the relevance of what's been said. And what's happening with the chatbots, the synthetic text extruding machines, is that they aren't the kind of thing that can have accountability, and somehow we have not managed to pin that accountability on the companies creating them. And so we end up with a lot of synthetic text floating around that nobody has accountability for, which can be hugely problematic. And just sort of thinking in terms of regulation, one of my favorite what ifs is, what if OpenAI were actually accountable for everything that came out of ChatGPT? I think things would change in a big hurry.
A personal question. Were you surprised or not with the capacity or the ability of ChatGPT for this kind of transformer? When we know how it works, we understand what the result could be, but when you observe the real results, are you surprised or not? Could you imagine 10 years before that it will be possible?
So linguistically speaking, I think it's interesting and surprising that the transformer architecture and the scales of data that we're looking at lead to well-formed, apparently coherent text. I think that's an interesting result. Oftentimes, there's a separate discourse that sounds very similar, where people talk about how it's unclear how ChatGPT has the capabilities that it does. And that, to me, feels like a lot of overinterpretation of the text coming out as if it were doing various kinds of reasoning, which I don't think it is.
We can now move to our second speaker. Thank you very much, Emily.
Okay, thank you for your attention. I am not a scholar in linguistics, so I'm going to talk about translation, and from the point of view of its insertion in a specific economic and social context. So I have this one slide. First of all, obviously, the advent of first neural machine translation and now AI has had an enormous impact on the translation industry. One could even call it a disruption. But we have to be precise here. There are different types of AI. AI is an umbrella term for things that go from the bots that we all know, that are general public, all-purpose conversational bots. But you also have AI-enhanced linguistic tools. I'm thinking of language tool to correct texts, or develop right to rewrite your texts. And you have customized smaller programs. So what is currently happening is that we see a lot of things like Pamelia. Pamelia has been developed by Air France, and basically the idea is to give the airport agents, Air France airport agents, a tablet. And whenever a traveler arrives with questions, the agent can ask the AI to sift through all the documentation and regulation and come out with an answer in 85 languages. So that's a closed-circuit corporate solution. Now I'll move on to the wider impact on the translation industry. And as you can see, I've differentiated between 3 areas, which is not usually what we do, but I made a special case for academic translation. First, in terms of technical translation, to put it bluntly, it's been wiped off by AI. That is, what is currently happening is that most of the industry is based on corporate automated solutions for big accounts, and that's provided by an oligopoly of major companies. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have smaller clients, smaller companies using AI as a self-service to self-translate texts, meaning that basically there's no more work for translators. Through the interviews I conducted this spring, people said that over the past year, they've seen their earnings drop by 50%, and many of them are considering other options. And so in terms of methodology, we're massively moving towards post-edition, MTPE, machine translation post-edition. But there are still jobs in the industry, not just not translation jobs. Of course, a lot of jobs about prompt crafting or designing customized programs such as Pamelia. And sometimes you can use also generative AI to do what is called vibe coding. That is, you use the generative AI to create a little program that will help you solve a problem, any kind of problem. One of my interviewees used it because he had to write a textbook for children learning French, and they had to follow a progression in vocabulary acquisition. So he used AI to create a little program that would help him sift through the vocabulary and create appropriate content. That's one thing. Translation for the publishing industry, wow, that's a very complex picture. Lots of experiments going on, but so far nothing completely conclusive. Most translators still operate on the first draft methodology. That is a human-made first draft, and say that they want to use AI as an assistant to create variants. Sometimes they use it to play it out vocally. They use it to do documentary research. There would be a lot to say about that. Can we use ChatGPT to produce reliable information? And in the publishing industry, you see 2 major tendencies. One is a complete swamp of AI slop, that is AI-generated content that is has been produced to piggyback the success of a bestseller or an event. Something like summaries of well-known books or biographies of people that are in the news, and they're really swamping the platforms. And the second thing that is happening is that selling authors' data, by which I mean their works as data, is becoming a third source of revenue for publishers, in addition to book sales and to the selling of rights. and that feeds into the general economics of data, which is gaining considerable importance in global economics right now. So it's complicated picture, and many people are deeply afraid in terms of the publishing industry. And now I move on to academic translation. Why? Because of risks. I mean, if you get it wrong in the love story between John and Pamela, so what? But if you get it wrong in scientific articles, I think here we have big problems. And here being French, I'm going to speak from the perspective of non-Anglophone scholars. We are under tremendous pressure to publish in English for what is called in French la découvrabilité, discoverability, I think, and at a minimal cost. Therefore, AI seems the solution, and I'm pretty sure everyone has used it to help them prepare abstracts or translate the final version, but there are lots and lots of loopholes and issues here, depending on the kind of tool you use. But let's face it, most people use ChatGPT, don't they? Because it's the one that we all know, and it's the one that is freely available. There are a number of the problem here is that one is information theft. You know that in English, intelligence can have this meaning of information gathering for a different country, for example. If you translate your preprint through ChatGPT, because all that goes through ChatGPT interface can be used by the company, you're giving away your information. It's the same with Google. Okay, if you look at the terms and conditions, they can use everything for training and for profiling and for marketing purposes. And also, I'd like to point out something else, is that translation, as mediated by humans, can be part of the scientific process. So here I speak from my experience in the humanities. It can be a test for hypothesis. It can be a confrontation with cultural differences. This is where you can coin new concepts, so the discussion, the exchanges between the scholars and the translators have intrinsic value. So here is my message here would be, let's try and rethink the situation. And for example, instead of rushing to automatically translate our text into English, let's reverse the charge. Let's let the others translate and us provide carefully read, translated, vetted abstracts, maybe with notes from translators about particularly sticking points, and that is very important. My second slide, and the one I want to end on, corresponds to a question that's been on my mind for a number of months now, is even though these tools are very impressive, are they neutral? And now, this is it. I had to write a proposal, like many of us, and I had my ideas, and I thought, let's use ChatGPT to help me write a coherent paragraph of less than 400 words based on the following content. So I wanted to talk about linguistic diversity, AI pedagogy. To make it short, everything that's being underlined in yellow is missing in the text that ChatGPT returned. And the things that are highlighted in purple are the things it added. I did run the same experiment with Gemini and Mistral, and I had a result that was closer to my intent. So, are we dealing with a neutral tool? I'm really not sure.
Thank you very much. So my question would be, where do you see the potential of artificial intelligence, large language models, however we want to call it, for translating and interpreting? You talked a lot about the risks, and but is there maybe also some potential?
Yes, of course. I only had 10 minutes. The literary translators, they use it a lot to make experiments. I think it's tremendously useful also in the classroom to have several variants and to discuss. This is another of the unorthodox view I'd like to propose is, let's not use these tools to provide us with solutions. Let's use these tools to provide us with examples, with scenarios, with problems that we can discuss. And so that's one thing. And it's definitely, like I said, an assistant. However, I still believe we need human input to make sure that we are delivering, especially in terms of science, is correct. But I am quite afraid that within the general context, there's a roller coaster of cost cutting, and people may be tempted to use the tool and overlook the limitations.
Thank you. Oh, is this one working? Yes. Okay. Given what you know about the sort of requirements of translation and the fallibility of these tools and people's needs, what sort of regulatory interventions would you like to see, either at the level of national governments or perhaps at the level of scholarly societies, to shape better use or avoid bad use?
Okay, that's the key question. And that means that maybe we need to widen our perspective and see these tools in a wider perspective as to what they stand for and what they're useful for. One of the, I'm going to answer in two steps. First of all, the problem with these tools is that they tend to comply with these narratives. First, AI is here to fix things, to resolve problems. But as linguists and translators, we know that language is not just about providing solutions. We do many other things. Second, and that's very important, they feed into the economics of access and intention that make the wealth of platforms. Okay, this is why the big tech has been investing billions and trillions of dollars in it. So they are not here, they don't want to be regulated because it's a very valuable source of information about our customer profile, and it kind of channels us into their marketplaces. And finally, there's this narrative that AI is here for good, to make good. That can be challenged, and it's being discussed. So these things, we have to look at what they are made for in order to think of how we need to regulate. They are made to create more profit for Amazon, Meta, Google, etc. To which one should add another dimension, which is the close relation between the American government and these tech companies. I advise you to read the most interesting this America's AI Action Plan that has been released at the end of July. is President Trump's action plan for AI. And the point, I wouldn't want to misquote Donald Trump, so I quote, "It is a national security imperative for the United States to achieve and maintain unquestioned and unchallenged global technological dominance. These tools are not only here to make profit, they're also tools to feed into a power machine." So how do we regulate? Lots of ways. Of course, here we're in Europe. So regulate with laws and tax them.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the organization. I'm very happy to be here. And when the question for the roundtable was asked, I think about things. So I write it in French just to explain to you that my English is very poor, but it's not necessary for you to read it. It's in French, but it's not necessary. When I think about the idea of this roundtable, because of my background, I think about language, which is a cognitive ability, cognitive capacity. And because of that, I think that there are two main ideas in this. The first is that the language is made with words. So it's very good for artificial intelligence searchers, because I am a computer scientist since 40 years. I work in artificial intelligence. And when you said words, I think about something which can be digitalized. So something which can be put it in computers. So it's very, very good. So this part of the language is very, very nice to be computed. But there is another way, another phase for the language. The language is a kind of emergence of the thought. And this is more difficult because we don't know what it is exactly. So when you speak about the linguistic to computer scientists or artificial intelligence scientists, they think only about words, not about thought. But we have a lot of friends for that. The first one, for me, is Google Translate. So Google is a nice way to translate things. So I put my text, this you can read it. But of course, a second friend for me is DeepL. DeepL is better for the translation because it's nice and so on. And I have a third friend, which is ChatGPT. So I asked to ChatGPT, make the comparison. It's exactly copy and paste for the result. Make the comparison with the two texts. And because of that, I have the main idea to explain for you. Because both texts are the same, of course, because it's a translation of the same text, my production in French. So the language is cognitive faculty. You can read it. I have no pencil. Yes? Yeah, this first here. Language is a cognitive activity, cognitive faculty. So it can help humans for communication. Of course, this is the basement for my ideas. The second one is, because it's with words, language is with words, it's possible to connect this kind of expression with the thought, with body, and with implicit knowledge. So the main question for me, computer scientist, is to make the junction between the words and the implicit knowledge. And the third one is very difficult for me, because if we think about, at the end, I will come back for this idea, the third idea here. So, of course, it's possible to explain to ChatGPT, give me the difference between the text. Of course, the text one is with more like a conversation, because it's from Google Translate. The second one is more academic, polished, and formal. Of course, it's not interesting for me. We can obtain with ChatGPT a global comparison of it. So it's a good tool to produce something and to produce text and to produce ideas. Because of that, because I'm working in artificial intelligence, I'm working in artificial general intelligence. So we think that it's possible to obtain a general intelligence for the computer. It's an intelligence which can be made for every kind of problems. We can put some results in other problems, and it's artificial. If we work on this, we produce some data, some theses from PhD, of course, and two last PhD I prepared with students. One was on the crop. Crop is a common relevant operational picture. So this is the idea to obtain knowledge representation which could be helpful for people. For example, we have you have on the top here two representations. It's a very schematical. The first is an operator, a blue one. The second is another operator. And they have some ideas, they have some possibilities to understand things. Some things are outside of the scope, some things are inside the scope. And this part is a common relevant operational picture. So the words, the ontologies we can produce with both parts of two operators. But the main interesting thing is which is outside. So all these parts are outside this part, this man. And of course, the system can help people to think about things. The second one is to produce a cognitive process to obtain possibility to produce something, some knowledge. So if you well understand, the knowledge is a main part of our research. So we speak about, we produce some concept. We use models. Model, for example, is a model. This is one very old one from Nonaka and Takeshi. So they explain that knowledge is a part of knowledge is implicit, a part of knowledge is explicit, explicit with words, implicit in mind, and it's possible to balance or to change from implicit to explicit. We develop another model here, is that knowledge is a base, is a part of information, of context and sense. And when we discuss about knowledge, we discuss about one part is information, one part is concept, and one other is sense. So because of that, we have models for that. And we develop some experimental operation with people in front of this, and we obtain with methods such things that capitalization of knowledge, the measure of trust in artificial intelligence, and so all of this work engage some possibilities that we can produce this to help linguistic, of course. So because linguistic is a scientific field, scientific domain, you can use, of course, all the tools that artificial intelligence developed. But think that the consequence of that is that we develop a lot of, but too much, certainly too much concept, arguments, and so. So in the future years, we will see a flood of scientific papers. So what can we do with all these scientific papers? Some come from humans, some come from computers, some come humans using computers, some come from computers reading after by humans. So it will be a very, very disaster for science, in my opinion, in few years. But you can ask the AI process to produce the language. So what does that mean when we use token, probabilities, prompt? What does that mean? Is it real human language? I don't think so. And we can investigate AI models for knowledge representation like ontology, mental picture, and so on. So you can use the result of artificial intelligence just to improve linguistic. And the second part of the roundtable is the opposite. But I don't know, because I don't know nothing about linguistics. I am here to learn something about linguistics, to understand, to learn your question, your answer. And so I hope that at the end of the day, we can use in artificial intelligence something coming from linguistics. Of course, I asked the question to ChatGPT. He said, oh, it's a very good question, of course. He explained me 10 things, and the result is completely a pity, because the first possibility to improve the research from ChatGPT is do LLMs capture linguistic universals? I don't know why. I'm not sure. I think no, because it's a complete computer science approach, so it's not a human one. The second one is a pity, and the third one too. So if you use ChatGPT to obtain new ideas from new domains, it will be a pity. But if you use it in your own possibilities, I think that it can help you to produce some new scientific papers. And so perhaps at the end of the day, we can see what linguistic help for research on artificial intelligence. Thank you.
So I have a question for you, and this is never fun because you get to say that you have 3 friends, right? Google Translate, DeepL, and ChatGPT, and I get to be the one here saying, well, first of all, friend is anthropomorphizing, so I wouldn't call them that. But also, these systems are built with large environmental impact based on data that was stolen, or at the very least appropriated with no consent by the people who wrote it. And especially in the case of ChatGPT, also built with quite a bit of exploitative labor practices. So if these are your friends, how do you feel about them?
No, of course, it was just an expression. They are not my friend, of course. And I think that I completely agree with you. It will be a disaster using them in the future. But people made it. So it will be very difficult in the future to examine, for example, a new PhD or a new production, having in the mind that possible things coming from ChatGPT in this. So I think it's more a maze than a friend. I agree with you. Okay.
Yeah, just on a side note, I mean, I understand the metaphor you use, say they are friends, and actually because we're out of time, most of us here can say that we jump to these tools whenever without thinking about what's behind it, the economic model, all the ethical issues that are behind it. And another issue that might be also a problem is that because we're so willing to input text into these commercial AI agents, they actually train on what we feed them with. They're also trained on internet data. The problem is that we also output some AI-generated content on the internet, which AI will feed on, and that creates some sort of a vicious circle. So do you think, all of you, that maybe in 10 years' time, the internet will be actually a distilled environment where there's hardly any natural language left?
You couldn't tell.
Yeah, I mean, if you look even now, most of what's on the internet, as I understand it from the people who run the Common Crawl, is actually automatically generated garbage there for SEO purposes. So the part of the internet that we seek out and see is already the minority of what's there. The bigger issue that I see is that having built systems that can mimic human language use and not having required accountability for that text, we are now awash in the synthetic media that makes it hard for us to do what we used to do and find the good text.
To which I would like to add that these tools that pretend to be universal and come in apparently so many languages tend to be trained on English language content, typically Common Crawl. I think it's like 40 to 50% content in English. And if not English, it tends to be the dominant languages. So French, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic. And we have a huge issue of linguistic diversity because there's something like roughly 7,000 languages on Earth. But most of these tools really work on 100 of them and really work well on 20 of them. Mm. So that's another concerning factor.
Yes, and I think that keep in mind that this kind of tools works with words, not with IDs. It's very different, big difference between humans and language. So they are definitely not friends. Thank you.
Hello,
Good evening, everyone. I'm also very happy to be here and part of this panel, but believe me, it's very intimidating to speak in front of a room full of linguists when you're not a linguist. Anyway, I was born a linguist, but I now work in teacher education, so I teach English as a foreign language. And But I'm confronted with linguistic challenges every day in my classrooms because I see students increasingly use AI, LLMs, however we call them, and they use them for various purposes. They use them to write their term papers. They use them to check their answers. If they want to say something in class, they would use ChatGPT first to make sure that it is correct. They would use it as a dictionary. They would use it as anything, really. Some of them even use it as a friend, and sometimes my students talk about their younger brothers and sisters, and they don't use it for ChatGPT or any other large language model, but they give them names. So there is a lot to worry about. Anyway, so I want to look at artificial intelligence from an educational perspective, and I have three main questions. So question number one, how do we sustain and cultivate a human mindset in the age of artificial intelligence? How do we develop critical artificial intelligence literacy in our students and future AI users? And also how to foreign language learning as an interdisciplinary discipline, artificial intelligence and positive psychology intersect, because positive psychology, positive education is one of the areas in our work. So how do we enhance linguistic proficiency on the one hand, but also support the well-being of our students and also future teachers? So, first of all, there is a global, and I'm sure that most of you are aware of this, there is a global mental health crisis among the young generation, but also among people my age and older, so post-pandemic global mental health crisis. And there are multiple stressors, so wars, climate crisis, inflation, armed conflicts, etc. Especially young people feel overlooked, and they also feel lonely and stressed. What about teachers? Well, there's a wide emotional spectrum when it comes to teachers. I'm sure that some of you also teach, so there's a lot of joy in the classroom, but also stress and burnout, high levels of stress, depression, anxiety linked to work, to high workload and challenging content. What are the implications of artificial intelligence for mental health and well-being? So first of all, AI offers opportunities, so people say, for increasing mental health, but there are also risks that we need to be aware of and that need to be addressed. So artificial intelligence tools can support physical and mental health. So, for example, early problem detection, personalized treatment, virtual therapists, teletherapy, and continuous monitoring. But there is also this rising and excessive use of artificial intelligence, which may stress people out. So it may contribute to stress, loneliness, dependency, and other health risks for students and teachers. If the chatbot is the only friend that you have, the only friend that you talk to, this may feel a little bit lonely. Of course, well, AI is still pretty recent, so there are hardly any longitudinal or quantitative studies on the impact of artificial intelligence on mental health, but there are certain risks that we need to be aware of. So positive psychology and also positive education and artificial intelligence, a challenging match, definitely. First of all, positive psychology and positive education try to promote well-being and positive emotions via a strength-based, strength-oriented approach. Artificial intelligence performs human-like tasks, and sometimes it does feel like you're talking to a human friend. But there is no real human thought. And from a more critical perspective, humans are often reduced to measurable factors. So everything that we can measure comes up. Ethics, morality, and well-being are very often overlooked. And also, when you mentioned the word friend, you said, well, that's anthropomorphizing. There seems to be an increasing level of anthropomorphizing artificial intelligence, and also projecting human traits onto it. So what are the implications for education? AI integration, and that's my main argument, requires a human-centered approach to safeguard well-being and ethics. And the UNESCO framework, which is currently being developed for teachers and students, takes a human-centered mindset. And it also advocates that we keep a human-centered mindset when looking at artificial intelligence and working with artificial intelligence in the context of education. We can also look at the workplace, so that gives us some insights when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence in education, because AI is also used in the workplace. So it offers efficiency gains, so for example, automation, faster decision-making, but also challenges. So for example, increased stress and burnout. Self-efficacy is something that we can look at. So the belief of someone's beliefs in their ability to master AI skills can mitigate negative effects. And yeah, low self-efficacy is mainly, so people with a low self-efficacy mainly use AI for task completion, but people with a high self-efficacy use AI for social interaction and social in inverted commas. So AI can improve efficiency, but may foster dependence in some groups, like my students who wouldn't say a word in class without double-checking with artificial intelligence first to make sure that what they say is actually correct. Here's a quote: "An individual's self-efficacy in AI learning defined as their confidence and their capacity to gain and use AI-related information and skills is a potential protective factor in the realm of AI adoption that can help mitigate the negative effects of AI-induced stress on the mental health of employees." When we look at resilience, so AI can be a protective factor, but it can also be a risk factor. When it comes to education, it requires children to be resilient to use AI safely, and also effectively, healthily, safely, and effectively. So what we need to increase is our students' digital resilience, their ability to adapt to challenges, recover, collaborate, and manage stress. Key skills included in existing concepts such as digital literacy and data awareness, and I mentioned AI literacy earlier. We can also look beyond self-efficacy and look at self-regulation, social competence. So, for example, people looking for support, seeking support, asserting oneself, resolving conflicts, and they use AI for that. They use AI to get feedback, also to simulate interactions, and also train their social skills. But how do you train your social skills with an entity that is not social? So we can also look at problem solving. So how do we analyze and address problems? Effective problem solving enhances resilience and self-efficacy, and this is also increasingly important when it comes to AI. We can also look at stress management, self-awareness, and several other factors. When we look at teachers, teachers in many countries already face a very high workload, large classes, stress and burnout, and they may find that AI can be a support when it comes to lesson preparation, differentiated materials, corrections and feedback. So there are a lot of benefits, but AI, especially if teachers are not trained to use artificial intelligence tools, it can also increase stress and weaken their resilience. So AI becomes a stress factor. For example, there is a very steep learning curve when it comes to implementing AI in teaching and learning. They also feel a pressure to keep up. there are certain risks, a lack of curriculum integration, and AI may very easily feel as an added burden for already struggling teachers. So, and one of the key challenges, and I mentioned this earlier when it came to term papers, designing AI-proof assignments is also one of the challenges for the future. So when it comes to AI, large language models in education, there are certain benefits, and I also see some potential there, but there are still a lot of bridges that we need to cross. And when it comes to artificial intelligence and mental health, positive psychology, positive education, the number of bridges that we need to cross is even higher. Thank you very much.
I have lots of thoughts, but I'll start with a question. What do you know, or two questions. What do you know about how your students understand what ChatGPT is, and what do you tell them about it to help them understand?
Many of my students are very curious about what ChatGPT is, what AI is, how AI works, what they can use it for, but it's not something that they talked a lot about when they were still in school. So there was a lack of knowledge. Unless they're very interested in computers and technology, there seems to be a lack of knowledge when it comes to artificial intelligence. So many of them use it, but they don't really know how to use it, and also the background. So, for example, how the first data was collected, and you mentioned human rights. So there seems to be a lack of AI literacy in the young generation. So some are very excited about it, but also some definitely are also frightened. So I think education plays a very important role when it comes to the future AI world.
Thank you for all this. There has been a study recently released, I think by the MIT, that checked the cognitive abilities of students. You know the one I'm referring to is you give out an assignment to a group of students with access to ChatGPT and a control group without access, and then they measured brain activity, and they found out that the students using ChatGPT had, how could I say that, lazier brains than the other ones. Do you discuss this with your students? Have you seen that in terms of student output, for example, in a context where they have access to no tools?
I don't really think about their brains when I read papers, but there are a number of studies now that show that our brains are being rewired through technology, digital technology, and also artificial intelligence. And I think some of them also notice themselves. They find it more difficult to concentrate, they have a shorter attention span, they turn to ChatGPT rather than, so for example, when, some of them do work in a group, they wouldn't collect ideas first, but, turn to ChatGPT first and then talk about the ideas that the chatbot would give them. So this kind of human-centered mindset, and also that the use of technology should be flanked by human-human interaction is definitely is an idea that needs to be promoted, to put it that way.
All right, so one last thing that I'll try to put in the form of a question. You say that there's more bridges that need to be crossed for the mental health applications or benefits. Why? Why not just burn those bridges?
You can either burn them or cross them. I'm not saying that we should cross every bridge that we build or that is built for us. Maybe we should burn some of the bridges that are built for us. But if students, or if the young generation uses AI-powered mental health applications anyway, then I think the least thing we can do is enhancing their AI literacy, their critical AI literacy. And we should also empower them to decide which bridges they want to cross. So it's about, student empowerment, critical literacy.
Totally agree that that critical literacy, information literacy broadly is really important. I think we also need regulation.
Yes.
I think mental health applications of chatbots are just harmful and should be not allowed.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.